Hi there, friends. We are sorry for a couple of weeks off, but welcome back to the Meaningless Podcast, a podcast that commends the enjoyment of life because there is nothing better for a person to do under the sun than to eat and to drink and to be glad. I'm Pastor Tim, here with my good friend Ian,
Hey, how's it going?
and we're talking about Ecclesiastes chapter 8 this morning. Ian, any remarks to start off before we do our reading?
Yeah, I think we talked about last time when we did seven, that seven kind of ends abruptly and like it kind of leads into eight. Because if you look at eight, like, if you're looking at the NIV version, which we've been using throughout the podcast, it has these headings. So in eight, the heading is Obey the King, but there's like a little kind of paragraph, little stanza there before a couple lines that go, who is the wise? Who knows the explanation of things? A person's wisdom brightens their face and changes its hard appearance. So we kind of have this little run on of this idea,
Mhm.
maybe that wasn't finished, or maybe, there's a reason that it's here and not in Ecclesiastes 7.
Yeah, somebody at some point, when they were carving up the Bible into these chapters and verses, thought that it was a good connection to the next part. Um, yeah, it's always interesting to see that and to think about, what the flow of thought is in any biblical book.
Mm-hmm.
Um, there is one thing we can say is there is overall, right? Solomon is writing something that has a flow of thought overall,
Yeah.
and so whether we put a chapter break here or there, um, there will be a connection to whatever came before it, and there will be a connection to whatever comes after.
Yeah, I mean, I like this because if you read the whole thing, it kind of feels like almost like stream of consciousness in a sense. Like, he like sat down and just kind of, banged it out in one sitting. And this is just his thoughts, flowing kind of, because he's really at the culmination of his life at this point,
Right.
right? Proverbs is kind of in the middle, and this is kind of later in life. So it's like all the accumulation of everything just kind of pouring out into the
Mm-hmm.
thing, because there's no, even though there's the headlines and the breaks and different topics, sometimes it feels like a little chaotic, like it's going back and forth like really quickly at certain points. We see that here a little bit, where he talks about the meaningless, and then he talks about almost this kind of like, well, this actually is a meaning, and then goes into that. So this is always going back and forth. Then, like, you mentioned in the earlier thing, I think it was chapter 3, we have this kind of like cyclical thing. There's a time for death, a time for life, a time for joy, a time for sorrow, etc. So yeah.
The way you just described that, I liked that. It made me think of sitting down with so when I go to pastors' conferences, for example, and all the pastors are getting together, and after we have like our study sessions and our discussion sessions, usually there's just time where we're sitting down, either around a meal or afterwards, we'll open up a couple beers and just all talk about what's going on. And when you sit down with the older dudes, the guys who've been in ministry and are nearing retirement, or sometimes you get retired pastors who show up to these too, just to enjoy the collegiality.
Yeah.
Um, like you said, it it can feel a little chaotic because they'll just tell stories. They'll tell
Mm-hmm.
stories and they'll reflect on things, and it's not always the most tightly woven chain of it's not a thesis,
Yeah. Yeah.
antithesis,
Yeah.
antithesis, but there's so much wisdom in it.
Well,
Um,
maybe there's wisdom over intelligence, right? Because when I think of that, I think of intelligence where something is like really organized and structured, where wisdom is maybe more closer to like intuition, right? Intuition comes
yeah,
naturally, but it
like
also
that.
comes through experience, as opposed to like intellectual brain knowledge, like just knowing things and knowing facts and knowing dates or whatever.
Yeah.
Um, rote memorization. You can memorize everything but not know how to use it, so you have high intelligence, low wisdom. you know if you're
Talking
thinking,
like
I always think of like the AD&D, right? Like, you
right.
have the high intelligence score. With low wisdom might be like the absent-minded professor, or wizard or something like that, who's really
Hmm.
smart and knows all the stuff, but he's doesn't have the ability to really kind of make any sense out of it.
Yeah, yeah. book smart, street smart kind of thing.
Yeah.
And I think, yeah, as you mentioned, this is traditionally we understand Ecclesiastes to have been written toward the end of Solomon's life, a reflection on his life that he's spent overall. And you get that made pretty clear throughout the things that he says. You know, he talks about having done all these kinds of things throughout his life and all the projects that he's engaged in and all the wealth and yeah. So this is an older Solomon, a wise and aged, experienced king, really just kind of freely um, holding forth some of the lessons he's learned, and he sees a flow of thought as he's talking. It might not be so readily apparent to us as we listen to him exactly what the flow of thought is. Just like if you've ever again sat down with somebody who has a lot that they're going to talk about, they might seem to weave, but they see a connection, and whether we see it or not, there's wisdom there. Ian, you up to read?
Yeah. Yeah, sure. Let's take a look at the text itself. I'll read it, and then we can kind of jump in for a bit and take a look at it.
Wonderful.
All right, great. 1 second. Okay. So we're on Ecclesiastes 8, and again, we've been using New International Version, so I'll be reading from that. So if you're reading something else, obviously it might be a little bit different. Okay, so Ecclesiastes 8. Who is like the wise? Who knows the explanation of things? A person's wisdom brightens their face and changes its hard appearance. Obey the king. Obey the king's command, I say, because you took an oath before God. Do not be in a hurry to leave the king's presence. Do not stand up for a bad cause, for he will do whatever he pleases. Since the king's word is supreme, who can say to him, "What are you doing?" Whoever obeys his command will come to no harm, and the wise heart will know the proper time and procedure. For there is a proper time and procedure for every matter, though a person may be weighted down by misery. Since no one knows the future, who can tell someone else what is to come? As no one has power over the wind to contain it, so no one has power over the time of their death. As no one is discharged in time of war, so wickedness will not release those who practice it. All this I saw as I applied my mind to everything done under the sun. There is a time when a man lords it over others, his own hurt. Then, too, I saw the wicked buried, those who used to come and go from the holy place and receive praise in the city where they did this. This, too, is meaningless. When the sentence for a crime is not quickly carried out, people's hearts are filled with schemes to do wrong. Although a wicked person who commits 100 crimes may live a long time, I know that it will go better with those who fear God, who are reverent before him. Yet because the wicked do not fear God, it will not go well with them, and their days will not lengthen like a shadow. There is something else meaningless that occurs on earth. The righteous who get what is the wicked deserve, and the wicked who get what the righteous deserve. This too, I say, is meaningless. So I commend the enjoyment of life, because there is nothing better for a person under the sun than to eat and drink and be glad. Then joy will accompany them in their toil all the days of the life God has given them under the sun. When I applied my mind to know wisdom and to observe the labor that is done on the earth, people getting no sleep day or night, then I saw all that God has done. No one can comprehend what goes on under the sun. Despite all their efforts to search it out, no one can discover its meaning. Even if the wise claim they know, they cannot really comprehend it.
Thanks, Ian.
You're welcome.
Ecclesiastes chapter 8 for us. My thought, I'll throw this out to you. The overall theme that I would pull out of these verses is Solomon wants us to reflect on the relationship that we have toward authority. If we are someone who is under authority, how should we act rightly? And if we are someone who holds authority over others, how should we act rightly? But that's probably the biggest theme in this reading. Anything that sticks out to you?
Well, when I thought of the king, I, like you said, authority figure. So that's what I thought of. So I didn't think of it doesn't always have to be the king. It could be like, maybe today we would think the president. It could be,
Yeah.
a dictator, but it could also be like, a parent or your boss or, somebody else that has authority over you. And any situation in your life.
Yeah.
So I think part of this is, and this also goes into later kind of, what the Christian teaching is humility, and knowing and accepting where your place is and, your responsibilities that you have. Because, like I think of it this way too, like the more you try to kind of fight against something, the more problems you're going to cause, right? So by kind of following the rules, it's easier to get along. But I think the important part here is like when we're looking at five, whoever obeys his command will come no harm. Then we look at the next part there. It says, and the wise heart will know the proper time and procedure.
Mm.
So it's not this kind of just like passive taking everything and just, rolling over kind of thing, but humility in a sense of, which I like to use the word, and I think prudence, the word prudence
Mm.
really
Yeah.
is important for understanding Ecclesiastes, because that's what he's talking about. And I see a lot of parallels like with, Paul talks about this kind of stuff too, when knowing the right time and place to say things.
Mm-hmm.
And again, since we talked about like memento mori, time is a huge thing in the whole book. And you know I think that's kind of what Ray's trying to get at. Again, that's what his definition of wisdom is: knowing the proper time, knowing the proper procedure, knowing
Yeah.
how to, like, what was the other one that he did? It was a couple chapters ago where he said, what benefit is it to the fool if he knows how to behave, in like, the presence of the king or a ruler or somebody like that,
Mm-hmm.
you know?
Yes, I remember. What chapter is that? I want to say that's somewhere in chapter 7, but right.
Yeah, that might have been last time.
That there's, yeah, a foolish person. You might tell them what the right thing is to do. They might know it in that sense, but unless they have the prudence, the humble kind of wisdom
Mm-hmm.
to act on it, um, it's foolishness. I had an interesting conversation with my daughter, our oldest, the other day about uh, what the difference is between, as you were talking about, Ian, kind of intelligence and wisdom, the ability to, and what the difference is between knowing a lot of things and being intelligent was what I told her. I said, well, let's say someone tells you something that turns out not to be true. You kind of know this thing, but it's not true. You need to also be able to know, how can I evaluate this statement
Yeah.
that's being handed over to me? How can I determine its
Yeah.
truthfulness? Um,
Yeah,
and
and that
that's
ties in with six, the proper
yeah,
time and procedure. That's your evaluation,
yeah. That
Mm.
first portion, Romans Romans chapter 13 is probably the New Testament section that's kind of closest to like verses 2, 3, 4, 5, 6.
Yeah.
Romans chapter 13, where the Apostle Paul tells us that all authorities have been established by God, um, that there's no authority that exists on earth that wasn't established by God. And in our Monday afternoon Bible study here at Grace of God, we just read Jeremiah chapter 27,
Mhm.
which is a very interesting chapter. The the people of Judah are considering rebelling against Nebuchadnezzar, the Babylonian Empire, and they gather together other kings for kind of this war conference in Jerusalem to plan a rebellion against Nebuchadnezzar. And the prophet Jeremiah is sent to them to say, no, don't do this. Don't rebel against the emperor. Nebuchadnezzar is not a good dude. He is he is a I compared him in our Bible study, probably somebody like Vladimir Putin, who just seems to think they have the right to go and um, invade other countries for their own interests. That's who Nebuchadnezzar is. And yet calls him, Jeremiah chapter 27, my servant. Um, we we ought to be very, very careful as Christians about how we regard our government. This is an especially tricky one for Americans,
Yeah,
as
because it's kind
Christians.
of like foundational to our government. Like, our heritage as Americans is to, uh, and I think in a sense, and I always wanted to talk about this a little bit because of my experience. My background is I was like a libertarian anarcho-capitalist. So I was like the complete opposite of Christian. Like that's like self deification. Like you decide everything about you, and who cares about anybody else? But I kind of thought of it this way, like you could still be critical of the government, not you may not like it, but that doesn't mean that like you have a right to go out there and try to physically change. And that doesn't mean like being active and voting and stuff like that. I'm not talking about
Hmm.
that, but I'm talking
Right.
about by like violence, by force,
Yeah.
changing things like that. I
And that
mean,
is,
yeah, go ahead.
like you were saying, that is so much part of like our founding mythos as Americans. If you read, I got the Declaration of Independence up here. The beginning, when in the course of human events it becomes necessary for one people to dissolve the political bands which have connected them with another, um, a decent respect to the opinions of mankind requires that they should declare the causes which impel them to the separation. Right. So the founding documents of America very much have this claim, and the Declaration of Independence goes on like basically claiming under God we have the right to separate ourselves from the authorities over us. That is not a particularly biblical view of things. Now, the American Revolution is a more complicated subject than that. Some people point out the colonial authorities had tried to address the grievances of their own citizens over
Mm-hmm.
against the king and had been denied justice.
Yeah.
So, in a sense, the American Revolution was also trying to protect the. There were lower magistrates trying to protect those under their power from the
Yeah.
tyranny of the king. And yet, if you look at something like Jeremiah 27, you kind of ask the question, like, well, is is it right even for lower level authorities to throw off um,
Like a
an
ruling
unjust
basically. So the king is
yeah
saying you have to do this. They're saying, well, this is what the situation is.
yeah
Yeah, I know it's kind of a difficult situation to think about because, like you said, we're so used to kind of and especially now it's so like politics is so like
yeah
charged, like emotionally, and it's so vitriolic, if you want to use a better word, like because that's all it's about. It's about using the worst, most vulgar slurs possible that you can to describe the politician that you don't like, or it
hmm
just happens to be on the wrong team or in the wrong place at the wrong time, and just crosses your path and your path of ire. So it's like, it's even worse than it was maybe back then when they might have had like legitimate grievances. And I mean, that doesn't say that there isn't bad things that go on in the government. I
right
mean, I try to work at this way, like try to separate, like say, well, the government's good because God instituted the government, but in the same time, the people in the government are sinners. So, like, yeah, they're
yeah
going to do terrible things, and they might not be the best person. But I think sometimes too, we talked about this maybe in Bible study. I don't know if we talked about this in the podcast, but
hmm
with like the whole idea of massive God and how God, even in this case, you mentioned Nebuchadnezzar, like he uses him for his purpose, and this is an evil dude. You know what I mean?
yeah
Like a really wicked person, and so there is those kind of things. Maybe he's putting these bad politicians in a certain place to, have his purposes accomplished, and that always, it's always like I think our problem there too, and I just want to say is like I'm at the point where like I can just accept that. Like if I see
hmm
something that's like everyone be, why would God let this happen? And I'd be like, I don't know. I can't know. I like he says
yeah
it right here. What does Solomon even say? Who knows the explanations of things? And that was my note for 8 in the
yeah
beginning was
that's a good one.
the
Hmm.
who knows the explanation? Who is like the wise? Nobody knows except God. That's the only person that knows.
Yeah, I've seen verse 7 there too, in addition to the one that you just cited. Since no one knows the future, who can tell someone else what is to come? Like,
Yeah, the Lord.
we right when we ask like, oh, why? I don't know. Um, I genuinely cannot often offer any definitive answer to why questions like that.
I mean,
Um,
the best thing I could ever come up with is that my experience was like this is, um, and I see it in the Bible. I can't think of anything right off the top of my head, but that sometimes we're put through these trials so that when we come out, the received joy and the everything is amplified,
Yeah.
right? So I kind of see it that sometimes we need to go through tragedy and through bad things, just because the general brokenness of the world, and we have the devil is constantly on the prowl, and we're Christians, we're going to be tested constantly. So I think that's kind of like maybe a part of a part of it.
Hmm. When we think about, as you pointed out, like the fact that kings, rulers, authorities are just sinners like you and me. Um, the second portion of chapter 8 here, Solomon has some words to the authorities, to other kings and people who have authority, as you pointed out, right? Just like the
Mm-hmm.
fourth commandment, Luther's explanation tells us when we think about in the Bible things about authority,
Mm-hmm.
we really apply it all over life, in families where we have parents who have authority, in the workplace, in the church, in the government, wherever there's somebody who is over others, we kind of apply these principles. Um, Solomon is ready to acknowledge, verse 9, there is a time when a man lords it over others to his own hurt. Um, Ultimately, that a ruler can abuse the power that he has, um, and it won't necessarily go well for him. Solomon points out that you know um, rulers rulers have been overthrown by revolutions throughout history. Um, Kings have ended up with their heads cut off by mobs. Uh,
Mm-hmm.
like Solomon wants to warn the king, like, hey, you have the power, and I am telling people to obey you, but be careful, right? Verse 11, when the sentence for a crime is not quickly carried out, people's hearts are filled with schemes to do wrong. Like
Yeah.
the the fundamental task of government is to deliver justice.
Yeah, and that goes into the whole kind of thing we're talking about American culture, especially with Western expansion, and then kind of the romanticism of the Wild West and stuff. You have the idea of like a vigilante, and you see that even today, where people are feeling like we had all these political assassinations in the United States,
Yeah.
politicians killed, like people that CEO of the healthcare company, for example.
Yep.
And this guy Luigi was being idolized, treated like he was a hero, like a folk hero, for doing
Yep.
this thing. I mean, he murdered somebody.
Yeah.
Regardless of how bad or that guy's action, that CEO's actions could have been and how they affected him, that's not his place to do that, right? So
Yep.
this is again what kind of we're talking about here, where like, um, of course I lost my train of thought. That's okay. Do you want to finish on that thought? Like, what do you think? Because I think like we kind of see that like a lot with this kind of no,
Hmm.
sorry, not
That's okay.
happening.
Yeah. When we see it, it's an example of this. When the sentence for a crime is not quickly carried out, people's hearts are filled with schemes
Yeah.
to do wrong. Like when people see injustice, and I don't know. I don't want to pretend that I know everything about healthcare policy in the United States, right? Um, I have healthcare, thank God. Um, we have decent healthcare, my family does. Um, but sometimes I'm surprised at the bills that we get, and I'm surprised at the um, profitability that these companies report, even as
Mhm.
my premiums continue to increase. Uh,
Mhm.
there seems to be, there certainly is an incentive for companies to squeeze the premium payer further and further, and to try and get further, better, more and more profit out. Is that a just thing? No.
No. But
And
what is one? Then you make another unjust act on top of that.
right.
What? How does that create? Like, does shooting that guy fix anything?
Yeah.
No, it doesn't
And
really. Even if anything, the companies are going to be like, well, maybe we have to do more. Maybe we're not doing enough. Like, look at this as kind of like a defiant attitude. Like,
yeah. Well, and
so
that's, Solomon is really, he's pointed here. He says, when the sentence for a crime is not quickly carried out, people's hearts are filled with schemes, not to administer justice. That's not what he says. As if,
To do
people
wrong.
want to take justice in their own hands. What they end up wanting to do is, like you pointed out with the Luigi example, they end up wanting to do something that is wrong.
Yeah.
It is not justice. It is murder. It's wickedness.
Yeah.
And that's
It's,
a
it's
frightening thing.
yeah, that's what I was gonna say. It's really scary that it's so glorified in our culture now. Just like that being that kind of attitude and that kind of behavior, you're seen as kind of like a hero, or even worse, like you're worshipped like a god.
Mm.
Which is, I mean, that's the whole culture we live in, right? It's basically like modern America is like the seven deadly sins on steroids. And yeah, so
Well, so what are we supposed to do when we see these things going on? When we see, on the one hand, rebelliousness among, our fellows in society, people who do not honor the government, don't respect it, um, don't look at it as the representative of God, which it is. And when we see government um, failing to be the representative of God that it ought to be, failing to administer justice, governing officials in it for their own pockets,
mhm.
what are we supposed to do? I think verse 15 is our answer. Right?
Yeah,
That's
just just forget all about it. Just go out and have a good time.
yeah.
Well, here's my thing is like I said last time was I was like oh, I disagree with Solomon because he was getting really, almost like mopey to a point, like emo, you know, with all like the
Uh-huh.
meaningless and meaningless kind of stuff. But then this is where I hit it with him 100% because, I was, I'm not trying to like puff myself up or anything, but like I was told as a kid that I was always like really smart and gifted and stuff like that. And I always looked at like my intelligence as a curse and all those things. And I always wanted to be stupid. So this is my thing is it's growing up and like realizing and as an adult the simple things are the most important things. And this is what he
Mhm.
talks about right here. It's not about having the best job or the best intelligence or, being the smartest person or the richest or anything. And, he'll talk about that a little bit in the next chapter when we do 9. Um, but yeah, I mean, he talks right here. It's just enjoy the basic things, food, having something to drink, being company, right? He
Yeah.
reiterates again in the next chapter where he talks about his wife, having a wife, but that could also be a family member or friends or anything. Like just because you're single or don't have a girlfriend or a boyfriend or a spouse doesn't mean that
Hmm.
you still can't, be among other people. And it doesn't always have to be social. It's something being of service to somebody, right? Whether it's
Yeah.
your parents, your church members, people on the street, maybe somebody on the street, somebody in the store. But I
I
think
think,
I really came around to that simplicity. What were you going to say? Go ahead.
yeah. I looked at it this way too, verse 15. Um, how can we adopt that attitude where we, if people look at life, honestly, they should be troubled by things that they see, right? That we should be troubled to see um, people around us sinning and government over us sinning. Societally, what the solution is then is to get out and protest, uh, to go to either a to show up on January 6th and storm the Capitol, or to go to a No Kings protest, or to be, if you're not being politically active, um, are you do you even care, right? And that's right, that's left, that's
Mm-hmm.
whatever. Um, the Christian can take instead this attitude because we know that yeah, we should care about these things. I guess I should say one. We should care about these things.
Mm-hmm.
When I go to the voting booth as a Christian, I want to be well informed. I want to vote for somebody who's going to do, as far as I'm aware, like seems to be intent on doing what's good and right and
Mm-hmm.
carrying out their role well. But my my job as a Christian is not to think that I'm going to fix the world. Um, if I ask myself in life, was I the perfect citizen that I ought to be? The answer is always going to be no. I
Yeah.
could have always, I
I've
could
been a good
always,
American citizen in the sense of a
yeah,
classic American.
yeah. Well, the answer is always going to be no. I could have been more active. I could have run for school board or
Sure.
town council or gone to an event or um, done
Yeah.
more research about the candidates, that kind of thing.
Yeah, well,
Um,
that's like what you're talking about, though. That's the good way to do it. That's how you get active and you spend your time and your energy and all that stuff in trying to promote Christian causes that are, things that are possible within the government that are shared, right? But I think a lot of times too now, like especially uh it's you got to go out there and you got to get angry and you got to break stuff and you got to scream because it's event. And that's the
yeah,
thing is, my thing, I was also kind of like a conspiracy theory guy, so I'm always analyzing things way too much. But they want you to get out there and be on the TV and be on the social media and be seen being violent and screaming and shouting and doing all that stuff and releasing the anger, because you know what, all the attention goes there, and then you're not focusing on the real issues that need to be taken care of.
yeah,
So it's all like a smokescreen kind of thing to distract you from doing what you're supposed to do. And then you go out and you're among people, you feel like you're getting something accomplished, right? You're out there, you're walking the miles, you're doing the chants and the drum beats and stuff, but
uh,
it's just performative. It's a performance. It's theater. You just go out there and scream like the what was it, the Bacchanal, right? When they worship Dionysus, they
the
would just get
nicest.
drunk and scream and shout and have the catharsis, and that was it. And that's basically what it is. It doesn't accomplish anything.
Yeah,
So
yeah. That's what Solomon wants to bring around. That we should not be so confident in our own abilities to think, wow, I can really change things. Um, we can have this. He gives us instruction about this is how you ought to be as a citizen. This is how you ought to be as a person in authority. But ultimately, um, be be content for two reasons. I would say one, we're forgiven, right? Like if I can look at my life and say, wow, I have failed as a citizen. I haven't. I've voted without knowledge, and I've not paid the proper attention to the important things. I'm forgiven. Christ Jesus died for me, right? The gospel has to come in and remind me um, I'm forgiven in every aspect of my life, my citizen vocation included. I'm forgiven. Um, and second, Christ Jesus rules over all things. I can as a citizen look at my government and think, man, are they doing the best job? Um, Humanly speaking, probably not. Um,
yeah,
but Christ Jesus is ruling over them as King of all kings, Lord of lords, um, and so I can be confident that He will do what needs to be done in this life for the good of His people, um, and I go eat and drink and be glad.
yeah,
Any,
and yeah. Go ahead.
I was just gonna say that's kind of those are the notes that I've got on Ecclesiastes
Oh
8.
yeah.
And
Okay.
uh, any
Um.
concluding thoughts from you?
Yeah. So I just really loved how it always is this kind of cyclical thing. It goes back to chapter 3 again and again with all those kind of natural cycles that are occurring. Well, I think actually in the first or second chapter he talks about the natural ones, and then in the third one he talks about more like ones related to like human life.
Mm,
Um, I always struggled with the authority thing. That was my whole problem. My whole life was my pride was always getting the better of me. But you know, I go back to the simple thing, eat, drink. And it's funny, remember I said like in Proverbs, he's like, eat, drink, and be merry is the fool's maxim or something like that, right? Now he's like, well, actually,
uh-huh.
after some life, more like I ate, drank, and I drank myself, to the my limit, because he lived this lavish lifestyle. He
Mm-hmm.
was just like, you know what, it really is just the simple things, like a cold glass of water on a hot day, or something like that. Because I went through all the things. I was sold to lie as a teenager. You had to go to college. You had to be, in this kind of job, doing this kind of thing, and this kind of house, and this kind of neighborhood. um, you know, or now it's even worse, I guess, for the next generation. It's like you either got to be a CEO or an influencer or, a rock star or something. It's like, it's not that difficult. And I think because we're told that we have to strive for those things, which are meaningless, right? Havel, the wind,
Yeah.
right? Um, we kind of think like we kind of like lose hope and like and it makes it difficult for us to be content with what we have. And that was my big thing, coming back to church, and my whole kind of experience was just gratitude for the basic things. And even in my short prayers that I do, I just talk to God sometimes, and I'll just say, hey, thanks, this is beautiful. Like, I was in my backyard yesterday, and it was snowing when I came home from work, and like one side was completely black, and the other one was like clear, and it was like completely blue, and it was just snowing. And I'm like, I'm here right in this moment. Like, this is pretty great. You know, having a good meal after you're hungry, after you worked a long day. It's always something simple, I think. It doesn't always have to be complicated. And again, the desires, they feed themselves. So, and it's always, so you're always going to be wanting more and more and more until what? You despair.
Yeah.
So,
But just enjoy life. Eat,
yeah.
drink, be glad for what we have. And then Solomon says, joy will accompany you. That's God's promise.
Yeah. I feel like now that I'm like not expecting things, like good things just happen instead of me desiring, like, hey, I want this, I need this, I need this to be done, or I really desire this thing. Now it's just more like I'm happy the way things are. And then when I kind of do want something, or like maybe I don't even think about it, like subconsciously, it just kind of happens. So maybe that's the better way, because you're not always constantly fretting or obsessing over, you know, what you want, what you're desiring.
Hmm.
So, but yeah, like it says right at the end, no one can comprehend what goes on under the sun.
Yeah. Yeah. Anybody, yeah, that's a good wrap up. Anybody out there who's got like the inclination to be able to tell that they can tell others, here's how you've got to think about everything. And if I sound like that sometimes, oh, here's how you got to think about everything. Here's how you got to think about politics, and here's how you got to think about it. No one can comprehend what goes on under the sun. Do read the Bible, understand that Jesus Christ died for you and loves you and has forgiven your sins. Do the wisest things you can in each moment, and recognize no one can comprehend what goes on under the sun. Like we aren't going to get our arms around that, but God will, and God does, and He has. The kid's song goes, he's got the whole world in his hand. Right?
I heard that once in Sunday school.
Yeah, that's a throwback. That's a throwback.
Yeah, it is.
Well, friends, I think that's our reflections on Ecclesiastes chapter 8 for this week.
Yeah.
Thank you for joining us. God bless you, and we'll see you next time.
All right. Grace and peace be with you.